Gross margin is your production for the year, so your revenue, less your direct costs that are going to go into that crop. Like to see about 60 to 65%. So meaning you're spending about 35 to 40% on your input.
This is not about just making these numbers so that accountants and bankers feel happy.
So I guess this is just before we dive into that, this is really going back to the basics on the 5 things that we would hope most consider when making decisions or to help make decisions on the farm, whether you're growing, expanding, maintaining status quo, whatever part of the life cycle you're at in your farm. So yeah, the first one on the margin side of things is your gross margin, which pretty much dictates everything else after that. So high level terms, gross margin is your production for the year, so your revenue, less your direct costs that are going to go into that crop. And basically what you yield after that, it would be your gross margin. And so this is a good indicator of converting production into profit effectively. And so it's important to monitor that to see on a trend basis. And again, not just looking at 1 year, because 1 year in any business, including farms, doesn't really paint a good picture. Looking at, I would say, at least 3 to 5 years on an average or for a trend to see how the farm is doing on an operation perspective. But yeah, monitoring that to make sure you have enough gross margin to cover up everything else after that. Because everything else after that, I mean, is not incidental, but your margin is what dictates everything else after that. So.
Richelle, how do I know I've got enough to go to the coffee shop and brag realistically? You got to back me up here.
Yeah, sure. So I like to go on a percentage basis. And I know Dean will probably have some comments on a per acre basis after this, but on a percentage basis, so that gross margin that we're talking about, so your revenue less your direct input costs, like to see about 60 to 65%. So meaning you're spending about 35 to 40% on your inputs, leaving 60% to 65% left over for everything else to hopefully yield a profit at the end, right? And so over, like I said, a 3 to 5 year period, we're not expecting you to hit that 60 to 65% every year, because obviously things happen that are beyond our control, even as much as we plan into and mitigate risk. But hopefully at least 3 out of those 5 years, you're tipping that 60% scale to set you up for success going forward.
And so what happens if I'm not at that level? Does a big alarm go off, or I get a small electric shock in my chair, or?
Yeah, so then you're going to have to dive a little deeper and see, is it a revenue thing? Is it a marketing thing? Is it so on the pricing side? Is it a rotational thing? So introducing like agronomy on that side, or then again on the agronomy side, is it production thing? Are we putting the right amount down for what we're striving to grow? So it kind
of
need
to bring Mike Pommier in on the agronomy to kind of whip you into shape there.
Yeah. So
Mike will whip you into shape. What do you think of that, Dean? What's your retort?
Well, Richelle hit on the key points of that, and I'm a per acre guy. I don't like the percentage, right? I like per acre. Is it really? But really, what Richelle keyed on there was important. All this is a diagnostic tool to make us ask more questions. So, because our world is ridiculously complex. So for example, pretend if you had a 100 acre field, and the last 20 acres of that field was a perfect square. And the last 20% of that field was always flooded out, or was always alkali. You would analyze and say, well, the gross margin in that field doesn't seem to make sense relative to the area. And then you drill in and then go through all the stuff Richelle talked about. Because this is not about just making these numbers so that accountants and bankers feel happy. This is actually used to start making decisions to increase the likelihood of your success, right? If you don't use these to change and make better decisions, there's no sense doing it.
I
right?
thought
It's
we
not
were
a
trying to
feel-good
make the
exercise.
accountants and the bankers happy. That's actually that was my central motivation to getting into business. But I don't know I don't think it's going well, to be honest. You ever seen a podcast business plan? Richelle, COP. We could make up a lot of acronyms for that, but we're going to stick to the accounting terms of everything you learned in school. So cost of production, what's it actually cost to grow a crop? Why does it care? Talk to us about the break-even
Yeah.
number on a farm.
Yeah,